At dawn, the road is already alive. Trucks groan through thin mountain air, their headlights cutting across wet pavement while mist hangs in the folds of the hills like smoke from an unseen fire. Somewhere ahead in a valley still half asleep, workers are already unloading crates, checking manifests, wiping dust from their faces with the backs of their hands. This is Ruta Maya, and if you only heard the name, you might imagine a romantic trail, a line on a tourist map, a comfortable promise of heritage and scenery. But the real story is sharper than that. Ruta Maya is not just a route. It is a living artery of commerce, culture, pressure, ambition, and risk, stretching across landscapes where every kilometer costs money, time, fuel, patience, and sometimes lives. And the strange thing is this. The route was sold to the public as a way to connect the ancient world to the modern one, but behind the polished language was a brutal question. Who controls movement, who profits from connection, and who gets left standing in the dust when the convoy disappears over the ridge? Let's step back into the shadows of how this route came to exist, because the road itself is only the final layer of a much older story. Long before modern transport planners drew lines across maps, the Maya world was already built around movement. Not movement for its own sake, but movement as survival. Salt moved from coastal flats to inland towns. Obsidian moved from volcanic sources into tool workshops. Cacao, feathers, jade, ceramics, textiles, honey, copal resin, and food all moved through a network of canoes, footpaths, markets, river crossings, and mountain passes. The ancient Maya did not build one straight highway and call it civilization. They built a web, a nervous system, that mattered because in a region with dense forests, tropical rains, steep terrain, and seasonally dangerous rivers, the real power was never just in owning land. It was in controlling flow. Trade routes linked cities like beads on a cord, and each one had to negotiate terrain that could turn from passable to punishing in a single storm. A wrong turn in the lowlands could mean mosquitoes, mud, and exhaustion. A wrong crossing could mean your cargo rotting before you reached market. In other words, the original Ruta Maya was not romantic. It was engineered by necessity, maintained by knowledge, and governed by the constant threat of disruption. Centuries later, when modern planners and entrepreneurs began speaking of a revived Ruta Maya, they were not inventing the concept from nothing. They were repackaging an old truth: whoever connects the region controls its economic destiny. The expanded version of Ruta Maya emerged from that old idea and gave it a contemporary form, one designed for tourism, logistics, identity, and regional branding all at once. On paper, it looked clean. A corridor connecting archaeological sites, cultural zones, transport nodes, local producers, and cross-border destinations. In reality, it had to wrestle with everything that makes this region difficult: fractured infrastructure, political boundaries, local skepticism, environmental fragility, and the ever-present gap between what a route promises and what it actually delivers. And that gap is where the story gets interesting. Because the route was never only about roads. It was about legitimacy. It was about saying the Maya world was not locked in the past, but still moving, still speaking, still selling, still resisting. The early blueprints were ambitious and messy. Supporters wanted cleaner highways, better signage, linked heritage sites, artisan markets, improved freight systems, and a visitor experience that could transform scattered attractions into one coherent journey. Critics saw something else: a glossy corridor that might pull wealth toward a few showcase zones while leaving small communities to deal with noise, land pressure, and cultural commodification. Both sides were right, which is what made the project so unstable and so revealing. The deeper you look, the more Ruta Maya becomes a case study in how modern development works when it borrows the language of ancestry. The road surface, the parking areas, the fuel stops, the border checks, the visitor centers, the food stalls, the bus terminals, the loading docks, the small repair shops with grease-blackened floors and fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead, all of it had to function as one chain. If one link failed, the whole experience buckled. A delayed shipment in one zone could spoil produce in another. A road closure could wipe out a day of tourism. A bad season could choke the flow of cash for dozens of small businesses. And because the route operated across multiple regions and national systems, every success depended on coordination between offices that did not always trust each other or even speak with the same priorities. That is the real engine of Ruta Maya: coordination under pressure. Let's tear into the mechanics. Imagine the route at full scale. A visitor starts in one city, crosses into another region, stops at a ceremonial site before sunrise, eats breakfast at a roadside stall where smoke clings to the clothes, then heads toward a museum, a market, and a transport junction where buses, pickups, and cargo trucks all compete for space. Meanwhile, in the background, logistics teams are tracking temperatures for goods, scheduling maintenance, negotiating access, and responding to weather conditions that can change faster than any spreadsheet. This is not a single road. It is a system of systems. Tourism depends on freight. Freight depends on fuel. Fuel depends on stable supply. Stable supply depends on security. Security depends on governance. Governance depends on budgets. Budgets depend on politics. Politics depend on whoever can claim the route is working. That is why the expanded version of Ruta Maya became more than a transport initiative. It became a narrative battleground. One group described it as regional integration, a chance to make remote communities visible and economically active. Another group called it extractive branding, the kind of project that drapes itself in cultural respect while funneling value upward. Both interpretations can coexist because the route itself can behave like both at once. A mother selling handmade textiles near a station may finally reach a larger market. At the same time, a chain of middlemen may take a larger and larger cut of the sale before the money reaches her hands. A town may see more visitors, but also higher rents, more traffic, and a rising cost of living that quietly pushes younger residents away. That is the tension at the heart of the expanded Ruta Maya. It opens doors, it also moves the walls. And if you're obsessed with decoding the hidden machinery behind ambitious projects like this, hit that subscribe button because we build these stories from the ground up and follow them all the way to the consequences. Now back to the road. The expanded version demanded more than asphalt and signs. It needed storytelling, and storytelling is a kind of infrastructure too. The route had to convince travelers that moving through these places would feel like entering a connected cultural world rather than hopping between isolated stops. That meant packaging history, cuisine, craft, landscape, and local identity into a journey with rhythm. A sunrise at one site, a market at noon, a river crossing in the afternoon, a local meal under a tin roof while rain hammers the ground outside, a museum visit by evening when the air cools and the stone walls seem to hold the day's heat. Every stop had to feel meaningful, not random. Every transfer had to feel intentional, not like wasted time. That is hard to do because the region's geography does not care about marketing. Roads still flood, vehicles still break down, border procedures still slow movement, small producers still struggle to meet packaging standards, certification rules, and transport schedules. One missed pickup can unravel a whole day. One bad storm can erase a week of earnings. One bureaucratic delay can turn an efficient plan into a parking lot full of honking frustration and idling engines. And yet the route keeps returning because the need behind it is real. People need paths, commerce needs channels, memory needs access. The Maya world, past and present, has always understood this. The hidden reality is that Ruta Maya expanded in the space between ideal and implementation. Behind closed doors, meetings were not just about route length or scenic value. They were about land use, local permissions, business concessions, branding rights, maintenance obligations, and who would answer when the road failed under pressure. Those are not glamorous questions. They are the questions that decide whether a project survives. And in regions shaped by inequality, every question of infrastructure becomes a question of power. Who gets the new stop? Who gets moved farther from the road? Who gets the contract for construction? Who gets to call a place a heritage corridor while living nowhere near its dust, heat, and noise? The expanded Ruta Maya exposed that old pattern where public language hides private advantage. There were promises of jobs, but not every job paid enough to build a future. There were promises of growth, but growth is not the same as fairness. There were promises of cultural preservation, but preservation can become a cage when living people are asked to perform tradition for outsiders on demand. Still, dismissing the route as a scam would be too simple. That is the trap. Real systems are rarely pure. The route did create access. It did draw attention to places that were once ignored. It did help some artisans, guides, transport operators, and food vendors reach new customers. It did give younger generations a reason to see value in local knowledge. When a road opens, life changes. The question is never whether it changes. The question is who gets to steer. And that brings us to the modern impact. Today, Ruta Maya functions as a mirror held up to the region's future. In tourism, it helps shape what visitors think the Maya world is. Not ruins frozen in time, but a dynamic cultural landscape made of villages, workshops, festivals, cuisine, markets, and living memory. In logistics, it shows how cross-regional corridors can reduce isolation and improve distribution if the system is maintained and if the benefits do not get captured by a narrow few. In cultural politics, it reminds us that heritage is never neutral. The act of naming a route is an act of ownership over meaning. If a route is called Maya, then who defines what Maya means? The state, tour companies, local elders, entrepreneurs, students, farmers, all of them. That dispute matters because identity itself becomes part of the product. And products can be sold, simplified, distorted, or protected depending on who holds the pen. In the broader world, Ruta Maya belongs to a much larger pattern. From historic caravan tracks to modern freight corridors, humanity has always built power along pathways. The same logic that once shaped ancient trade trails now appears in highways, rail networks, port systems, digital cables, and tourism circuits. Whoever moves people and goods most efficiently can reshape entire regions, but efficiency alone is not enough. If a corridor ignores the communities that live along it, it becomes extraction with better signage. If it respects those communities, it can become a real bridge between memory and opportunity. That is the unfinished promise of Ruta Maya. Not perfection, balance, not a sanitized heritage fantasy, a living route with all the mess that living requires. And maybe that is why the story hits so hard, because we have all seen projects announced with grand language and clean diagrams, only to watch them meet the real world of weather, budgets, politics, and human need. Ruta Maya expanded because people kept insisting that a route could be more than a road. It could be an identity, an economy, a promise, and a fight over the future all at once. But promises are easy. Maintenance is hard, respect is harder, equity is hardest of all, and that is where the legacy lives. The route teaches us that connectivity is never just technical, it is moral. It asks who gets linked, who gets bypassed, and who gets to benefit when a region is finally made visible. The ancient Maya understood flow as life. The modern Ruta Maya tries to turn that wisdom into a corridor for the present. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it fails. Usually it does both in the same week. That is what makes it worth studying, that is what makes it real. So when you hear Ruta Maya, don't just think of a road, a map, or a travel brochure. Think of the engine beneath the surface. Think of the market stalls at first light, the border papers stamped at a tired desk, the stone steps warmed by noon sun, the cargo bay doors slamming shut, the diesel smell, the rain on the roof, the tourists asking for authenticity, and the local families deciding every day what to keep, what to sell, and what to defend. This is not just a route through land. It is a route through history, power, and survival. And if stories like this keep pulling you deeper into the hidden systems that shape our world, subscribe and stay with us. Because every week we follow the roads nobody bothered to explain, and we ask the questions that turn a simple name into a living mystery.